Marcus. Devereaux woke in the silence of his penthouse on the 47th floor with the precision of someone who didn't need an alarm. His body had been trained by 2 decades to wake at 5:47 a.m., exactly 13 minutes before any real necessity demanded it. His control over himself was so complete that even his unconscious mind obeyed a corporate schedule. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed São Paulo still sleeping, that magical and rare hour between night and dawn when even a megametropolis seemed to breathe calmly. Marcus walked to the window in his boxer shorts and watched the city rest. There was something about the solitude of that hour that attracted him when no one else was awake, when there were no demands, when he could simply exist without needing to perform existence. The apartment was a masterpiece of sterile perfection. Minimalist furniture from European designers whose names he knew but whose stories he didn't. A collection of abstract paintings his interior design consultant had assured him were investments works by emerging artists that supposedly would triple in value within 5 years. Italian marble floors that echoed each of his steps like sonic reminders of his solitude. Smoked glass cabinets containing a wine collection he rarely drank because he preferred the idea of the collection to the experience of the wine. He took his coffee from the Italian espresso machine that cost as much as a modest car. He knew its model name, its origin, its technical specifications, and the name of every component, but he didn't know the name of the woman who cleaned his bathroom twice a week. That disconnection, that vast chasm between performative knowledge and genuine ignorance, defined his entire existence. His phone began its symphony of vibrations around 6:15 a.m. Emails from Tokyo, where the markets had opened. Messages from São Paulo colleagues preparing for the day ahead. Slack notifications from his New York office, asking questions that couldn't wait until business hours. He responded to each with glacial precision, crafting messages that were professionally perfect and emotionally empty. There was a pattern to his communication. Never personal. Always professional, always leaving the recipient feeling slightly diminished for daring to ask something that required actual engagement. By 7 a.m., he was in his custom-built shower. Hot enough to turn his skin red, cold enough in its emotional resonance to match his internal landscape. He dressed in one of the 20 identical navy suits hanging in his walk-in closet, bespoke tailoring. Italian fabric made by a tailor in Milan who had been creating his wardrobe for the past 15 years and had never asked about his life. The drive to his office took 45 minutes. His driver, Roberto, had worked for him for 8 years. They never spoke beyond the necessary good morning. The route was always the same. Roberto had learned never to make conversation, never to intrude into the bubble of isolation Marcus maintained like a carefully preserved ecosystem. His office occupied the entire 48th floor of the Devereaux Tower, a building named after him, though he'd only chosen the name because leaving it unnamed felt unnecessarily honest. The space was vast, minimalist, high-ceilinged, designed to inspire awe rather than comfort. His personal office was larger than the house where he'd grown up in the suburbs of Salvador. There was a desk of dark wood and steel that held almost nothing on its surface, as if the mind behind it operated in complete minimalism. The walls displayed his achievements, framed magazine covers, industry awards, photographs of himself shaking hands with politicians and celebrities whose names he'd forgotten. At 42 years old, Marcus Devereaux was the kind of successful that people envied from a distance. He had money in quantities that most people couldn't conceptualize. He had power in an industry that shaped how millions of people communicated. He had status that opened doors and closed others. He had everything. He was perfectly empty. His assistant, Christina, appeared with the day's schedule at 8 a.m. sharp. She was a woman of 35 with competent efficiency written into her very posture. She had a husband and 2 children whom she'd mentioned once in passing. Marcus had nodded and looked back at his computer. He'd never asked their names. "Morning schedule is clear until 10, Christina said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned not to expect actual conversation. "Yeah, the board meeting, then lunch with the Feldman investors, then the fusion is scheduled for 3 p.m. That was the meeting. The deal that had consumed 3 months of his life, that would triple his net worth, that represented the pinnacle of his strategic thinking and negotiating prowess. It was monumental. It was transformative. It was the next achievement in an endless chain of achievements that changed nothing about the fundamental emptiness of his days. "Confirmed," Marcus said without looking at her. As she left, he turned to his window and looked out at the city waking up below him. Millions of people beginning their days, most of them struggling with things he couldn't understand because he'd never struggled with anything except loneliness, and even that he'd learned to treat as just another problem requiring management rather than solution. He had no idea that in exactly 6 hours and 47 minutes his entire understanding of what mattered would begin to change. Ana Silva had been awake since 4:47 a.m. Not by choice, by necessity. Her alarm hadn't rung because her body no longer needed one. 3 years of waking before dawn had rewired her circadian rhythms so completely that she now woke at the same time every morning, regardless of when she'd fallen asleep. It was one of the small ways poverty trained you differently than wealth did. While Marcus controlled his body with discipline, Anna's body had learned survival through sheer repetition. She pulled on the uniform, a navy polo shirt with professional cleaning services embroidered on the chest. Practical black pants, white sneakers worn at the heels from thousands of miles of pushing a cleaning cart. The uniform transformed her into a category, a function, a role. Most people's eyes would slide past her without registering that a human occupied that outfit. The first building was a medical complex in the Jardings district. Anna worked the hallways in silence, pushing her cart with efficient precision. The vacuum's hum was a familiar song, something she'd learned to work through rather than against. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while her mind spiraled through calculations that never stopped. Not even in sleep, medication for her mother's chemotherapy at 800 reais per session. 3 sessions remaining, hospital bills accumulating despite insurance, electricity bill due. Her sister Letitia's school uniform wearing thin at the seams, rent due in 10 days. The math never changed. There was always more month than money, more need than resources. By 7:30 a.m., she'd finished the medical complex and moved to the second building, a smaller office structure in Vila Madalena. By 9 a.m., she was on the subway heading to class. She had exactly 30 minutes between jobs to attend a mathematics course at the adult education program. The subway car was packed with people heading to their jobs, their faces showing varying degrees of resignation. Anna held a mathematics textbook, its pages worn from repeated studying, and tried to focus on the concept of percentages while a man's elbow kept bumping into her shoulder. The program was held in a community center that had seen better decades. The classroom smelled of cleaning solution and humid air that never quite circulated properly. Her teacher, Regina, was a woman in her 60s who taught with the exhausted patience of someone who'd spent 40 years trying to reach students who'd spent 40 years learning that education wasn't meant for them. Most were there because they had to be. A few were there because they wanted to be. Anna was there because she understood with bone-deep certainty that education was the only ladder that could lift her family out of this cycle. Anna, Regina said after class, pulling her aside. "I need to talk to you." Anna's stomach tightened. She was failing. She knew it. The percentages wouldn't compute in her brain the way they did with money. When it came to calculating how many hours she needed to work to cover costs, she was a mathematician. But academic math operated in a different language, one that required space in her mind that exhaustion had colonized. "Your work is excellent," Regina said, and Anna's shoulders lowered slightly. "But I'm worried about you. I can see it in your face. You're working too hard, studying too hard. Something needs to give. Everything needs to stay," Anna said quietly. "My mother is sick. My sister's in a situation. I can't afford to give up anything." Regina's eyes softened with a sympathy that Anna had learned to both crave and resent. Pity was the currency of the poor. It was free, abundant, and utterly useless. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit when you're drowning," Regina said. Anna wanted to argue. Instead, she gathered her books and left. She couldn't afford to drown. Drowning wasn't an option when other people depended on your hands to keep paddling. By noon, she picked up Letitia from school. Her sister was 14, with their mother's dark eyes and an increasing collection of secrets that terrified Anna. There were bruises this week, a purple smudge on her upper arm that Letitia explained away with "I fell during P." Anna knew better. She could read the language of lies on her sister's skin like a native speaker. "How was school?" Anna asked, though she could interpret the answer from Letitia's posture, shoulders curled inward, eyes avoiding contact, mouth forming the shape of a smile without committing to the emotion. "Fine," Letitia said. That single word contained everything they weren't saying to each other. By 3 p.m., Anna was in the hospital visiting their mother. Rosa Silva occupied a bed in the oncology ward, a woman diminished by treatments and uncertainty. She wore the uniform of the dying, hospital gown, and 4 in her arm, 4 smiles that took enormous effort. Anna sat in a plastic chair beside her and tried to look healthy, tried to project strength, tried to be the thing her mother needed her to be. "How are you doing, baby?" Rosa asked, reaching for Anna's hand with fingers that had become thin as bird bones. "I'm good, me. How do you feel today?" "Better. The doctor said the latest scan looks promising." They were both lying. Rosa was fading visibly, day by day. The treatments were buying time, not life. Anna's exhaustion was written in the tremor of her hands. But they had learned to lie to each other out of love, a dialect they were both fluent in. By 6 p.m., Anna was at her 3rd job. She worked for a cleaning services company that handled 3 office buildings in the corporate district. "Tonight," She pushed her cart through the pristine hallways of the Devereaux Corporation building, one of the city's most prestigious addresses, where the kind of money lived that rendered her invisible. The floor numbers climbed higher than she usually went. 38th floor, 39th, 40th. Her supervisor had texted, "Executive floor needs attention. Most people will have left by 6:30. You have access to all floors." The hallways at the top floor were different, more expensive carpet, better art on the walls, larger windows that opened onto views worth more than her annual salary. Anna pushed her cart, her mind still tangled in the mathematics test she'd failed that morning. Percentages. Applications of percentages. Why couldn't her brain make the leap from practical calculation to academic abstraction? She was reviewing her notes, trying to understand the concept one more time, when she pushed her cart through the wrong door. It was an enormous office, the kind of space that demanded silence and reverence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city from a height that made the world below seem theoretical rather than real. A desk of dark wood held almost nothing on its surface, as if the mind behind it operated in pure minimalism, unencumbered by the physical world's clutter. Original artwork hung on the walls, abstract pieces that suggested wealth without demonstrating understanding. And behind that desk, looking up from his computer screen with the sudden focus of a predator recognizing movement, was a man in shirt sleeves with eyes like winter water. Anna stopped mid-push, her hands frozen on the cart's handle. She recognized him immediately, though not from personal encounter. She'd seen his face in a magazine left in the hospital waiting room, a profile piece titled, "The Architect of Corporate Empires." This was Marcus Devereaux. Everyone in Snow Hollow knew that name the way they knew the names of the weather systems that determined whether they could afford to buy fish that week. "I'm sorry," Anna said immediately, her voice shrinking to match her perceived insignificance. "I thought this was... the cleaning station should be down the hall. I took the wrong turn." Marcus looked at her the way a chess player might look at a piece that had moved unexpectedly. His eyes performed rapid calculations, assessing her uniform, her age, her utility, her place in the hierarchy of his world. Normally, people existed to him only as far as they served a function. But something in this moment interrupted that usual algorithm. She wasn't performing for him, wasn't adjusting her posture to appear more compliant or more attractive, wasn't modulating her voice to sound more grateful or more apologetic. She was simply honest in her mistake, already resigned to dismissal. "It's fine," Marcus said, surprising both of them. "I'm not using this space right now. I'll just go." "Wait." The word came out before he decided to speak it. Marcus, who had perfected the art of solitude and control, now found he didn't want this particular room to become empty again. The evening had stretched before him with nothing but email and the hollow satisfaction of dominating markets. He didn't want that anymore. He didn't want to admit he didn't want that, but the desire was already there, undeniable. Anna paused, one hand still gripping the cart. "Are you part of the cleaning staff?" Marcus asked. "Yes. I work for 3 buildings in the sector." "3?" There was something in his tone, not judgment, but genuine curiosity, which was rarer than judgment and more dangerous. "Yes," Anna said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to work 3 jobs simultaneously. "My mother is sick. My sister needs care." The money from one job wasn't enough. She said it without performance, without the performative gratitude or apology that the wealthy expected from the poor. She wasn't asking for sympathy or offering her circumstances as a sob story for entertainment. She was simply stating facts. And something in Marcus, something that had been building pressure for decades like water behind a dam, cracked slightly. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Come in," he said. "What's your name?" "Ana Silva." "I'm Marcus." They both knew that was incomplete information. She knew who he was beyond his first name. He didn't ask hers beyond what she'd offered. But in that incompleteness was a kind of honesty. They were meeting as fragments of themselves, not as the full constructs they presented to the world. Anna pushed her cart inside and closed the door behind her, creating a contained space that suddenly felt separate from the city pulsing below them. She stood awkwardly, uncertain whether she should sit, whether she should leave, whether she should continue her work pretending this wasn't happening. "You can sit," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, and the act was somehow transgressive, a cleaning worker sitting in the CEO's chair, as if social hierarchy could be violated so casually. "3 jobs," Marcus repeated. "What kind of sick?" "Cancer, my mother." Anna paused, then added, "Chemotherapy. The treatment costs more than the disease itself, which is how they get you. When you're desperate, you'll sell anything, pay anything." The clinical way she stated this, not bitter, just factual, made it worse somehow. This wasn't someone seeking his pity. This was someone describing the architecture of her own suffering. Marcus felt something unfamiliar. Recognition. Not empathy from a distance, but a crack in his own carefully maintained walls. His mother had died of cancer when he was 19. He'd been at university, studying finance, building the intellectual foundations of his empire. His father had called him with the news while Marcus was in an economics lecture. He had listened to the words, understood the meaning, and finished the lecture because leaving early seemed like giving in to emotion. He had never gone back to that university. He had transferred to a different school in a different city, and dedicated himself to the singular purpose of never being that helpless again. If he had enough money, enough power, enough control, death couldn't touch him. It was a lie, but he'd built his entire adult life on it. My mother died when I was young, Marcus heard himself say. The words surprised him. He never spoke about this. It had been classified, compartmentalized, archived in the deep storage of his psyche where personal information was kept like classified documents. Anna looked at him then, really looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something he'd never seen in anyone else's eyes when looking at him. The recognition that beneath the suit and the office and the power, there was a person who had also lost something fundamental. "I'm sorry," Anna said. "Me too," Marcus replied. "About your mother." About all of it. And in that moment, sitting in his enormous office overlooking the city, something shifted. Two people from different worlds meeting at their breaking points began to see each other clearly. They began to meet after that night. Not dating, something undefined that existed in the spaces between convention. Conversations. Anna would finish her shift at the hospital cleaning contract around 10 p.m., and Marcus would wait in the lobby, sitting on an expensive chair that nobody had specifically told him was for waiting. They would walk to a coffee shop that stayed open late, or sometimes just sit in his car parked on a quiet street, talking about things that didn't require the performance of daylight. The first few meetings were awkward in the way that genuine human connection always is. They had no framework for what this was. Anna was used to transactions, money for labor, gratitude for survival, caution with authority figures. Marcus was used to power dynamics, people either serving him or being served by him with nothing in between. Neither of them knew how to just be with another person without that underlying current. But slowly they found a rhythm. "Why do you keep meeting with me?" Anna asked one evening as they sat in a cafe in Villa Maddalena, a neighborhood where the wealthy and the working class somehow coexisted in careful ignorance of each other. "You could be doing anything with your time. More important things." Marcus stirred his coffee, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because you're real," he said finally. "Everyone else in my life is performing. My colleagues are performing their competence. My acquaintances are performing their worth. Even my family, we perform being a family. But you're not performing. You're just ... existing, being honest about existing." "I'm not performing because I don't have time to perform," Anna said pragmatically. "I'm too tired. Performing requires energy I can't afford to waste." "Exactly," Marcus said. "That's what makes it real." But it wasn't that simple, and they both knew it. As the weeks passed, something deeper was happening beneath the surface of their conversations. Marcus would sit across from her and feel, for the first time in his adult life, seen. Not as a CEO, not as an achievement, not as a resource or a prize or a status symbol, just as Marcus, a person who had lost his mother and spent 23 years building fortresses of money and power to ensure he'd never lose anything again. Anna would look at this powerful man and see someone equally trapped, though by different walls. His cage was made of glass and money, hers was made of necessity and exhaustion, but they were both cages. One night after they'd been meeting for nearly 3 months, Anna told him about Letitia, about the bruises that multiplied like lies, all of them impossible to fully explain away, about how she'd left her sister with their aunt because she had to work, because there was no one else, because the system designed to protect children seemed designed instead to destroy families. "There's a mark on her arm this week," Anna said, her voice tight, and when I asked about it, she looked at me like I was asking her to betray someone, like the bruises were her fault, like she needed to protect whoever put them there. Marcus, who had learned to compartmentalize emotion and treat problems as abstract puzzles to be solved, felt his carefully constructed walls cracked further. He reached across the table and took her hand. "We should report it," he said. "To who?" Anna's voice was sharp, defensive. "The police? They'll take her. I'll lose her to the system. And I can't prove anything. A bruise is an evidence. A story from a frightened girl is an evidence." Marcus felt the familiar frustration of someone accustomed to solving problems with power and resources, confronted with a situation that couldn't be solved that way. Money couldn't buy Letitia's safety. Status couldn't protect her. For the first time, his greatest assets were useless. "I know a lawyer," he said. "Someone who specializes in family law, protection cases." "No." Anna's response was immediate and absolute. She pulled her hand away. "I don't want your charity. I don't want to be your charity case. You're not, I am. If I let you fix this for me, then when you get tired of playing hero, what happens to us? What happens to Letitia? I've built my entire life on not depending on anyone, on being capable, on surviving. If I let you step in now, I lose that. I become someone waiting for you to leave. There it was. The question they'd both been avoiding. What was this? Where was it going? What did two people from such different worlds actually have? I'm not playing hero, Marcus said quietly, holding her gaze, and I won't get tired. That's not how I work. I don't do anything halfway. I don't commit to things I'm not going to follow through on. Anna wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe him. But trust for her had been trained out by years of disappointment. Teachers who said she could make it then showed surprise when she actually tried. Employers who promised stability and then cut hours. Family members who offered help and then used it as leverage. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, something in his tone, absolute, certain, not offering hope but stating fact, made her want to risk it. I'll think about it, she said finally. About the lawyer, Marcus nodded. He understood that thinking about it might be as much as she could offer right now. In his world of instant decisions and immediate action, he was learning that love sometimes meant accepting the pace of someone else's healing. That night, after they parted ways, Marcus sat in his office alone and did something he'd never done before. He cried. Not dramatically, not with the kind of cathartic release people wrote about in books. Just quiet tears that fell while he looked out at the city, understanding that he was falling in love with someone from a world so different from his that he might never fully understand her. And somehow that impossibility made it more real. Everything changed the night Anna called at 2:47 a.m. Marcus had been asleep, genuinely resting for the first time in years when his phone rang. He jerked awake, his executive brain immediately processing, crisis, emergency, action required. He answered before his eyes were fully open. Letitia's in the hospital, Anna said. Her voice was hollow, the kind of hollow that only comes when someone has already cried so much they've run out of tears. A broken arm. They said she fell. But Marcus, I know she fell because someone made her fall. He was out of bed, pulling on clothes. Where? Which hospital? Albert Einstein. She's stable. They're keeping her overnight for observation. I'm here. I've been here for hours. I'm coming. He didn't ask questions. His driver was sleeping in the garage apartment. By 3:15 a.m., Marcus was pulling into the hospital parking lot. He found Anna in the emergency waiting room, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. She was still wearing her cleaning uniform from her evening shift, now stained with something dark blood, probably Letitia's, though Anna hadn't cleaned it off. He sat beside her without speaking, and she collapsed into his shoulder like someone who had finally found permission to stop holding herself together. They sat like that for hours, not talking, not moving, just existing in the shared space of crisis. By 5 a.m., they were allowed to see Letitia. The girl was sleeping, her small arm in a cast, her face bruised in a pattern that suggested impact rather than accident. Marcus and Anna sat on opposite sides of the bed, watching her breathe, each thinking their own version of the same thought. This child had been hurt, and the systems designed to protect her had failed. When Letitia woke, she wouldn't look at them. She wouldn't explain how the fall happened. She wouldn't name who was responsible. She just lay there, her eyes fixed on the hospital ceiling, as if the fluorescent lights might eventually burn away whatever she was protecting. We're going to handle this, Marcus said quietly to Anna while Letitia slept again. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you want to be independent, but right now your sister needs both of us working together. Can you accept that? Anna, exhausted beyond the point of maintaining her walls, nodded. Marcus called Paulo, his lawyer friend who specialized in family law, at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., Paulo was at the hospital with documents and information. He moved through the system with the kind of efficiency that only came from understanding exactly how it worked and having the resources to navigate it quickly. What emerged over the following days was a pattern. Letitia wasn't the aunt's first victim. There were other girls, other bruises, other explanations that didn't add up. There were records complaints filed by other family members, previous investigations that had been inconclusive, a pattern of behavior that should have triggered intervention but hadn't because the aunt had money, had a lawyer, had connections. The aunt was arrested on suspicion of child abuse. Letitia was placed in a foster care program, not ideal but safe. Anna's greatest fear that Letitia would be taken by Child Protective Services and lost to the system didn't materialize because Marcus and Paulo had already begun the process of legal guardianship, which meant Letitia could stay connected to Anna even while being protected. It wasn't perfect. It was nothing like the outcome Anna had wanted, but it was safe. It was better than the alternative of waiting and hoping the bruises wouldn't get worse. The cost of this acceptance, though, was profound. Anna felt something shift inside her during those hospital days, a small breaking of the walls she'd spent her entire life building. Independence, the thing that had defined her, was complicated now by the reality that she couldn't do it alone. That accepting help didn't make her weak, it made her human. It made her able to save her sister. Marcus, meanwhile, was having his own transformation. He took a leave from work. His board was confused. His assistants scrambled to manage his responsibilities. The empire continued to function without him, which told him everything he'd refused to acknowledge for years. He wasn't essential to it. It was essential to him as a distraction, as a purpose, as a way to avoid feeling anything. But the company didn't need him the way Anna needed him now. One morning, sitting outside Letitia's hospital room at dawn while she slept, Anna asked him, "Why are you doing this? You could go back to work. You could pretend this isn't happening." "My mother died when I was 19, Marcus said, the words coming easier now after being spoken once before. "I was at university. My father called and said she was gone. He said he couldn't come home because he had a meeting in Tokyo that he couldn't miss. I watched my mother die alone in a hospital, and I realized that nothing, not achievement, not money, not status, was worth having if the people you love have to suffer while you accumulate it." Anna listened. "I spent 23 years proving that wrong. I spent 23 years building an empire to prove that I didn't need anyone, that I could survive anything through pure will and intelligence. And I succeeded. I was completely alone, completely safe, completely empty." He took her hand. He reminded me what it feels like to need someone, to be needed, to matter to a specific person, not to markets or shareholders or the abstract concept of legacy. "What if I can't be what you need?" Anna asked quietly. "What if I fail?" "Then we fail together," Marcus said. "That's what love means. Not rescue, not salvation. Just showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Anna didn't respond with words. She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat together as the sun rose over the city, two people from different worlds who had somehow become essential to each other's survival. It was inevitable that Marcus would want to make it official, to define what they were, to secure it with commitment and words and the kind of permanence that his mind could organize and control. 3 months after Letitia's hospitalization, after she'd been settled in a safe foster program, after Anna's mother had responded positively to a new chemotherapy protocol, Marcus decided it was time to propose the next logical step. They were in his apartment on a Friday evening. Anna had been staying over more frequently, though she maintained her small apartment, claiming she needed a space that was entirely hers. Marcus had learned not to argue about this. He was learning many things about compromise. They were sitting on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness settled over Snow Paulo. It was the kind of moment that seemed designed for declarations. Marcus had even planned what he would say, rehearsed it in the shower that morning the way he rehearsed board presentations. "Move in with me," he said. It wasn't a question. That was the problem. In his world, proposals were statements, not negotiations. Requests were understood to be orders softened by politeness. Anna set down her wineglass and turned to face him. "No," she said. Marcus blinked. He hadn't actually prepared for this response. In his mental simulation of this conversation, she had cried happy tears. She had said yes. They had begun discussing logistics. "No?" he repeated, as if the word might mean something different when he voiced it back. "No," Anna confirmed. "I won't move in with you." "Why not?" There was genuine confusion in his voice. "We're together. You spend most nights here anyway. It makes sense logistically." "Exactly," Anna said, and there was a sadness in her voice that made his chest tighten. "It makes sense logistically. It's efficient. It's practical. But it's also a way for me to disappear." "You wouldn't disappear." "I would," Anna interrupted. And now there was certainty in her voice, the kind of certainty that comes from deep self-knowledge. "I know myself, Marcus. I've spent my whole life being invisible to everyone else, to the world, to my employers, to people who look through me like I'm not there. I cannot become invisible to myself." Marcus wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. This wasn't negotiable. This was a boundary, and he was finally learning to respect those. "If I move into your apartment," Anna continued, "I'll become part of your life. I'll wake up in your space, work from your study, eat from your kitchen, spend my days in your world. Your money, your resources, your life becomes mine. And everything I've built, everything I've struggled for becomes questionable. Did I achieve what I achieved because I'm capable or because I have access to your resources? Did I get my job because I'm qualified or because my partner is Marcus Devereux? Did I succeed or did you succeed for me?" "That's not fair," Marcus said quietly. "I would never—" "It's not about what you would or wouldn't do," Anna interrupted gently. "It's about what happens inside my own head. And I know myself. I know that I would start to doubt. I know that the walls I've built, the independence, the capability, the strength would begin to crack. And I can't afford that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Marcus felt something break inside him, not painfully, but like ice breaking in spring, like necessary dissolution. He was being rejected, but not for reasons he could argue against. She was rejecting him not out of lack of love, but out of an understanding of herself that was more important than their convenience. "So what are we doing?" he asked finally. "We're seeing each other," Anna said. "We're learning who we are together. We're building something real, but I'm keeping my apartment. I'm finishing my degree. I'm building my own life. And I'm choosing you, but only if you're choosing me as I am, not as someone you've folded into your world." It was the most honest conversation they'd had. Marcus took hours to process it. He called Paulo that night and asked for a referral to a therapist, something he'd never done. Despite decades of loneliness that would have benefited from professional intervention, he began to understand that love for him had always been about possession, about acquiring and protecting like he did with his business assets. But Anna was teaching him that love could be different. That love could mean wanting someone's success more than you wanted their dependence. That love could mean letting someone you cared about thrive independently. Over the following weeks, Anna finished her degree in social work. She graduated on a Saturday afternoon in a ceremony at the community center where she'd spent so many evenings studying. Marcus sat in the audience, and it wasn't about him. She hadn't asked him to attend, he'd asked permission to come. This achievement belonged entirely to her. She got a job at a nonprofit working with families in crisis, women escaping domestic violence, children navigating the foster system, people trying to rebuild their lives from rubble. The pay was a third of what Marcus made in a month, but she walked into that building with a dignity he'd never seen in the corporate world. She walked in as someone who'd lived this, who understood it from the bone level, who knew that rescue wasn't the same as justice. Their relationship deepened in ways that couldn't be photographed or documented on social media. They learned each other's fears without trying to fix them. Anna discovered that Marcus's coldness was protective, a armor built by a boy who'd learned that attachment meant loss. Marcus learned that Anna's strength was built on a foundation of terror, held together by sheer will, and the knowledge that collapse meant her family's collapse too. They began to heal, not because they fixed each other, but because they refused to let each other heal alone. A year passed. Not without difficulty, but with genuine transformation that was incremental, sometimes invisible, and always hard-won. Marcus remained CEO of Devro Corporation, but he restructured his entire approach to the position. Where he'd once worked 80-hour weeks, he now limited himself to 50. He delegated authority to people he trusted, which meant he had to actually build trust with people, a skill he'd never needed before because he'd only ever trusted himself. It was uncomfortable. It required vulnerability. It required admitting he didn't have all the answers. His board questioned whether he was losing his edge. His stock prices told a different story. When he was less exhausted, his decisions were clearer. When he wasn't operating from a place of desperate striving, his intuition was sharper. The company thrived, not because of his superhuman effort, but because of his renewed clarity. He implemented changes that his previous self would have dismissed as inefficient sentimentality. An education program for employees who wanted to complete their degrees. A scholarship fund for children of low-income workers. A partnership with organizations working to combat poverty in São Paulo. When his shareholders complained about reduced profit margins, he looked them in the eye and said, "I'm not interested in your concerns." Some shareholders left. Others stayed, curious to see what a CEO who actually cared about something beyond quarterly returns might achieve. The company's reputation transformed. It became a destination for talented people who didn't just want high salaries but wanted to work somewhere their effort meant something. Anna, meanwhile, was building something real in the nonprofit sector. Her first major case involved a family of 5 living in a single room of a shared apartment in the favela do Moinho. The father had lost his job to injury. The mother was working 2 jobs that paid less than minimum wage. 3 children, ages 5, 9, and 14, were sharing space with their parents in a room the size of Marcus's walk-in closet. Anna navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth of social services, employment assistance programs, and housing initiatives. She helped them secure better housing through a government program. She connected the father with rehabilitation services and job training. She helped the oldest daughter access a scholarship program. It took 6 months. It required her to work nights and weekends. It required her to believe in a system that had repeatedly failed people like this family, but she did it. And when the family moved into a small apartment of their own, when the father found employment in a different field, when the children had their own beds, Zana came home to her small apartment exhausted and spent the entire evening crying. Marcus found her there, sitting in darkness on her bed. "What happened?" he asked gently. "I helped them," Anna said, her voice breaking. "They're going to be okay. And I helped make that happen. And I can't stop crying because I keep thinking about all the families I didn't help. All the people still living in that room. And I'm only one person, and there are thousands, and I can't help them all. Marcus sat beside her and held her while she grieved for problems she couldn't solve. He didn't try to comfort her with platitudes about doing what she could. He just witnessed her grief, which was its own form of love. "You're changing the trajectory of individual lives," he said finally. "That's not a small thing. One family at a time, you're changing the possibility of entire lineages. That matters." Anna understood then that loving Marcus meant accepting his belief in incremental progress, just as he'd learned to accept her refusal to disappear into his world. Their relationship had settled into something that looked unconventional to anyone observing from outside. They saw each other most nights, but Anna maintained her small apartment. She spent weekends sometimes at his place, sometimes at her mother's home, where she helped care for Rosa, who remained in remission but lived with the constant awareness that cancer could return. Marcus spent time at Anna's apartment, sitting at her small kitchen table with her and Letitia, who visited regularly from her foster program placement. Letitia had thrived once she was safe. She was considering university, thinking about environmental science. She still had moments where her trauma surfaced, nights where she couldn't sleep, moments where she flinched at unexpected touch. But she was healing, and Anna, watching her sister rebuild herself, understood that her own refusal to disappear into Marcus's world had been exactly right. She was still here. She was still strong, and she was choosing Marcus from that position of strength. 2 years after that first wrong turn into Marcus's office, they bought a house together. Not his penthouse, not her small apartment. Something in between, a modest house in a neighborhood where the nonprofit had its offices, where Anna could walk to work, where Letitia visited on weekends, where Marcus's colleagues couldn't understand why he'd chosen to live somewhere so deliberately ordinary. The house was their first mutual compromise. It was a space that belonged to both of them because they had chosen it together, but neither of them had surrendered their autonomy to possess it. Anna had her study where she prepared case files. Marcus had a home office, though he spent less time there than he once would have. They had a kitchen where they cooked together, though neither of them was particularly skilled at it. Rosa Silva visited once a month, and Marcus and she developed a quiet respect for each other. She understood, in the way that mothers do, that this man loved her daughter genuinely, not as a rescue, not as a possession, but as an equal partner in building a life. One evening, sitting on the small balcony of their house, Marcus said, "I was thinking about that day you walked into my office by mistake." "The best mistake I ever made," Anna replied. "For me too. But I was thinking, it wasn't a mistake, was it?" Anna considered this. "No," she said finally. "It was exactly when we both needed someone real." 5 years after that first wrong turn into Marcus's office, they sat in a small restaurant that served honest food. Not expensive, not trendy, just real. The kind of place where families gathered, where waiters knew their regulars' names, where the overhead lights were slightly too bright and the chairs didn't match. Anna had chosen it years ago, and they'd been returning ever since, usually on Friday nights when they both needed to remember where they came from. Marcus held her hand across the table, and there was no performance in the gesture. Just a man and a woman who had seen each other's darkest parts and chosen to stay. His face had changed over 5 years. There were lines around his eyes now, but they were laugh lines rather than stress lines. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples. He looked older, but in a way that suggested he'd actually lived rather than merely survived. Anna looked at him across the table and saw the man he'd become, someone who'd learned to be tender without being weak, who'd learned to lead without dominating, who'd learned that the most powerful thing you could do was show up for someone you loved. "I was thinking," Marcus said, "about that day you walked into my office by mistake." "The best mistake I ever made," Anna said. It was something they'd said to each other many times over the years, but it never lost its meaning. For me, too. But I was thinking, it wasn't a mistake, was it? At some point in our lives, we reach the exact breaking point where we're ready to see someone real. Any earlier, I would have thrown you out without thinking. Any later, you would have been too broken to trust me. Anna squeezed his hand. "Timing," she said. "More than timing. It was like the universe knew exactly when we needed each other." Anna shook her head gently. "I don't believe in fate. I don't believe the universe plans things. But I believe in choices. Every day I choose to be here with you. Every day you choose to show up for me. That's not the universe, that's us. That's the choice we make repeatedly, even when it's hard." Marcus understood that this was the highest form of love, not divine intervention or cosmic alignment, but the choice to love someone when you could choose otherwise. The choice made more powerful by its contingency, its lack of guarantee. He could leave tomorrow. She could decide she wanted something different. What they had wasn't bound by contract or obligation. It was bound only by the daily decision to show up. "I love you," he said. They had said it hundreds of times, thousands probably over 5 years. But it never lost its weight. I know, Anna replied, and I love you, but I'm also keeping my apartment, and my job and my independence. He smiled because of course she was. That was who she was. That was what he loved about her. His own apartment, maintained like a second home for when they both needed space, was a testament to their commitment to honoring each other's autonomy. They had learned that true partnership didn't require merger. It required maintaining your own center while choosing to orbit around another person. I wouldn't want it any other way, Marcus said. Rosa Silva had made it through another remission cycle. The doctors had cautiously optimistic words about her latest scans. She spent more time at their house now, no longer needing constant care but still grateful for their presence. She watched Marcus and Anna move through their home with the ease of two people who'd learned to live together without losing themselves, and she understood what her daughter had done. She'd found someone who respected her daughter's strength instead of wanting to rescue her from it. Letitia was thriving. She'd completed her undergraduate degree in environmental science and was now working for an NGO focused on sustainability in urban communities. She'd inherited her mother's resilience and her sister's determination. She was kind but not soft, strong but not closed off. The trauma she'd endured had marked her, but it hadn't defined her entirely. She visited their house regularly, and she watched Marcus with a wariness that had slowly transformed into respect over the years. The nonprofit where Anna worked had expanded to 3 locations. She'd become the director of one branch, overseeing a team of social workers. The pay was still nothing compared to what Marcus made, but she took pride in it. Her income was hers. Her achievements were hers. And Marcus, understanding this completely now, never once suggested she could have a more lucrative career. He understood that the work itself was the payment. When they left the restaurant that evening, they walked through the city together, 2 people from different worlds who had become each other's world. The streets were alive with the chaotic energy of a Friday night in São Paulo. People rushed past them. Vendors called out prices. The city hummed with a million individual stories, a million people making their own choices about who they wanted to become. You know what I realized? Anna said as they walked. What? That we didn't save each other. We didn't rescue each other. We didn't complete each other. We just saw each other. We looked at each other's cracks and said, I see you. I see all of you and I choose this. Is that enough? Marcus asked. Anna looked up at him and her eyes held 5 years of evidence. 5 years of showing up. 5 years of choosing each other through difficulty and joy and the mundane moments in between. It's everything, she said. The scholarship fund had grown beyond what Marcus had ever imagined when he'd first established it. In 10 years, it had granted educational opportunities to 847 students from low-income backgrounds. Most of them were the first in their families to pursue higher education. Some had become teachers, doctors, engineers, social workers. The trajectory of entire family lines had been altered by someone believing in them at exactly the right moment. Anna sat in her office at the main headquarters of the nonprofit, reviewing applications for the latest cohort of scholarship recipients. The organization had expanded to 5 locations across São Paulo, serving thousands of families each year. She'd been promoted to regional director 3 years ago, a position she'd initially refused, not wanting to lose the direct client contact she valued. But Marcus had helped her understand that leadership was also a form of service, that elevating the work of others was a way of multiplying the impact. Her office was small and practical, decorated with photos rather than art, pictures of families she'd helped. A photo of her mother Rosa at her 60th birthday party, healthy and laughing in a way that had seemed impossible 10 years ago. A picture of Letitia receiving her master's degree in environmental policy, and one photo of her and Marcus from 5 years ago standing in front of their house looking genuinely happy rather than performing happiness. Marcus had stepped down as CEO 5 years ago. He'd passed the role to someone younger, someone hungry in the way he'd once been, but someone who understood that profit wasn't the only measure of a company's worth. He now served as chairman of the board, attending meetings quarterly, spending most of his time on the foundation that bore his mother's name and organization, dedicated to cancer research and patient support services. He worked part-time. He traveled. He volunteered. He read books for pleasure, something he hadn't done since childhood. He'd become, by any measure, a whole person. Not because Anna had fixed him, but because he'd finally allowed himself to be broken down and rebuilt on better foundations. Their house had evolved over a decade. What had once been a compromise between his world and hers had become genuinely theirs, a space that reflected both of their values. His art collection had been gradually replaced with photographs and pieces from local artists. Her practical furniture remained, but now sat alongside some of the better pieces from his old apartment. The library they'd built together contained business books next to social work textbooks, novels, history, poetry. a life of genuine intellectual curiosity rather than performative learning. They'd never married. This had surprised people, friends, family, colleagues who expected that eventually he would propose and they would have a wedding, but neither of them felt the need for it. Marriage as a concept carried baggage they didn't need. It suggested ownership and legal bonds in ways that felt contrary to their fundamental understanding of their relationship. They had chosen to be together every single day for a decade. What document could add weight to that? Rosa Silva had passed away 2 years ago, peacefully, in a hospice where Anna and Marcus had sat with her in her final hours. She'd made it to 65, 17 years longer than her doctors had predicted when she'd first been diagnosed. Those 17 years had been purchased not by money, but by her daughter's determination, and by love. The love Anna poured into her care and the love that Marcus demonstrated simply by showing up, by treating Rosa with dignity, by honoring her as the woman who had raised his greatest love. Letitia had married and divorced, had a career she loved, and had become close to Marcus in a way that suggested genuine familial affection rather than mere tolerance of her sister's partner. She consulted with corporations on sustainability issues and had become an expert in environmental justice. She never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the aunt's house, the bruises, the terror. But she'd refused to let that define her, just as her sister had refused to let poverty define hers. The scholarship fund had been expanded to include a specific program for children escaping domestic violence or abuse, a program that bore Marcus's mother's name and was personally overseen by Letitia. It was her way of honoring what had been done for her, of ensuring that other children wouldn't have to wait for someone to intervene. Some of those children had gone on to university. Some had become therapists, counselors, social workers. The cycle of harm was being interrupted, one person at a time. On a Friday evening, exactly 10 years after that first meeting, Anna and Marcus sat on the balcony of their house. The city spread before them, glittering in the darkness, full of millions of lives being lived, struggles and triumphs they would never witness, stories they would never know. "Did you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten lost that night?" Anna asked. "Every day," Marcus said. "In an alternate version of my life, I'm still in that office, still alone, still thinking that what I was building mattered because I had nothing else to measure it against. And does it matter now? Not in the way I thought. It matters because it allows me to help, because it gives me time with you, because it gave me a reason to become a person worth knowing." He paused. But the real achievement, the thing that actually changed me, was learning to see people, to really see them, not as resources or problems or opportunities, but as humans with their own stories, their own struggles, their own worth. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. They had built something real, not despite their different beginnings, but because of them. Because Marcus had finally learned that connection was the only wealth that mattered. And Anna had learned that accepting support wasn't weakness, but the most honest form of strength. Somewhere in São Paulo, another Anna was working multiple jobs and wondering if the world had anything better to offer. Somewhere another Marcus was sitting in an empty office and realizing the chasm of his loneliness. But here in this house, two people had found each other. Not because of fate or destiny, but because they had both reached their breaking points at exactly the same moment and chosen to see each other clearly. And that made all the difference. The city hummed below them, indifferent to their story, full of millions of other stories, just as profound, just as meaningful, just as worthy of being told. But this was theirs, and it was enough. We invite you to like this video if it resonated with you, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you stories that celebrate the complexity of human relationships, that honor both struggle and resilience, and that remind us that the people we think are invisible are often the ones teaching us what it means to be truly alive. Every subscription helps us continue sharing narratives that matter, stories that challenge the conventional definitions of success and love. Before you go, we have one question we'd love you to answer in the comments. What country are you watching this from? We'd like to know where this story found its audience, because love and connection transcend borders, just as Marcus and Anna's journey transcended the barriers that tried to keep them apart.